So thank you for joining us, everyone who is online, and welcome to our masterclass today on influencing your project teams in a matrix structure. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Nicola and I'm a project and change recruiter in the legal industry. And I'm joined again today by Jeremy Nichols. Jeremy has over 10 years experience in leading project and programme teams across a range of industries, including a number of law firms. And he's also the author of The Everyday Project Manager, which is a great tool, which I have to say I use myself, detailing skills and concepts of best practice project management. We are also joined today by Chris Mansfield. Chris is a portfolio and programme manager at Linklaters, and over the past 10 years he has led project and programme teams with heaps of experience in influencing in complex matrix structures. So we're hoping to pick his brains on this as well. So thank you both for joining me this afternoon. Jeremy, I'm going to start by handing over to you. Can you give us an overview of what is the matrix structure?
Oh, it's a good question. It's thanks, Nicola. It's so typically on projects, you're managing a group of people that you've pulled from various other areas. So it's not your typical line manager employee relationship. You're actually typically, as a project manager, managing people who don't directly report to you. I've got a slide I can share on this just quickly, just to give you an idea of what I mean. So this is one I pulled together. Can you see that? Can I just check?
I can see that.
I can see it, Jeremy.
Okay, fabulous. So this is a typical sort of matrix structure about for what might be an office move project, for example. So you can see you've got the project manager in there. Now that project manager, if they're a permanent employee of the organization, might report into the head of projects typically. But for the purposes of the project, they're going to be reporting into the sponsor of the project, the head of property in this case. And they've got all these people who are involved in the project. So you've got somebody to do carpentry and electrics, and you might have somebody who's dealing with the supplier, the removals person who's going to shift kit from one location to the other, someone who might do planning of the space, who's going to sit where. But all these people have direct reports in their normal day-to-day life and don't normally report to the project manager. Now, this works very well, obviously, in terms of being able as a project manager to pull on all sorts of different areas of expertise across an organization and even outside of the organization. But it also presents its challenges insofar as you don't have ordinary line management responsibility of these individuals. They report to others for things like their personal development, in salary negotiations, in, if they've need to escalate in their normal day-to-day role. And they're also balancing the project work against their day-to-day role. So, for example, the IT subject matter expert on the project happens to be the help desk team leader in their day job. So they're trying to do that, to balance that role against the work that they need to do on the project, advising the PM on perhaps how the IT equipment should be configured in the new office. So that's a sort of very, very rapid idea of how a matrix organization might look, and perhaps some of the initial challenges. And for the PM, it does create certain challenges, because you are having to influence these people rather than manage them. It's not a line manager relationship in the normal sense. Therefore, you have to rely on alternative means for motivating, incentivizing, and so on. So if I turn that off, hopefully that gives a bit of an idea of
that's a great overview, and it's not a project that I think I'd be very good at managing. That looks incredibly complex. Chris, can you give us an overview of the different levels of influencing? So Jeremy's talked about sort of the difference between managing and influencing, but different levels of influencing within that project structure.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Nicola. So obviously there are lots of people on any project that you're going to need to influence, not just your project team, but I like to break them down into 3 key layers. So thinking about the top-down layer, the most senior people in the organization that deal with projects, with them, you really want to understand what is the priority of your project across the portfolio of projects that you're delivering, and also all the other initiatives that are going on in the business as usual world. So typically this will be either portfolio management group or an executive group or a leadership group, people that decide which projects to take forwards and which things are the priority for your function or for your firm. It's really important to understand where your project sits next to the other projects in terms of priority. This will help you frame the conversations that you have with your team and with line managers down the line. Also, this may change over time, so it's worth checking back in if large new projects or programs are initiated during your project. So there's a small amount of influence you and your sponsor typically can have in that space, but actually it's more of an understanding point from the senior team is where does this sit in the priority of an organization. So then we'll move on to that middle layer. These are the line managers, the people who actually look after the day-to-day management of the resources you'll be working with. So these are the people that are going to allocate the resource to you, and they're also going to be coming to you if there are conflicts. So this is the person who you're going to want to speak to fairly regularly to explain, initially to explain to them the drivers of the project, and also to understand what their priorities are, what's coming up for them that's important, and starting to get an understanding of where the conflicts might be and where you can come to some kind of agreement about where to make low-level priority calls where you don't need to have escalation points. I think it's really important that you have a regular check-in with these line management resources, just to make sure nothing's changed and to make sure things are running as smoothly as they can be. And then lastly, Jeremy's talked about these people already. This is the bottom-up view of influencing, which is the people that are actually working on your project, so the people that have been allocated to you by line management to help you deliver the project. Once you've even assigned an individual, you really want to spend time getting to know them, understand their motivations, agreeing their role on the project, and ideally you want to create a meaningful link between their personal and professional development goals and the work they're going to be doing on this project. That really does help kick off that influencing piece. A key point to note here is this isn't a one-time event. You do this at the start of the project clearly, but you'll want to be talking to your team members about this stuff on a weekly or even daily basis. I like to check in with line managers at least monthly on my projects, and then clearly with the executive groups, when things change, that's the time to get in and understand what does that change for me in terms of priority. That really will help your projects run a lot smoother.
That is a lot of influencing to do.
It is.
I've got a poll, guys, for those people that are online, and to get an idea for us to know which of those levels of influence are the most challenging, whether it's that top-down, middle layer, or bottom-up. So I'm just going to publish that. If everyone can put in their thoughts, and we can focus a little bit on that moving forward. And also just to say, if anyone has any questions throughout the chat, please just post them on there and we can cover them off either at the time or towards the end if more relevant. Where does the influencing start, Jeremy? When do you need to start this process?
Well, as soon as possible is always the response on any question like when should we start, typically. But it's interesting the point that Chris picks up there on the sort of three layers. It's sort of a realization that's dawned on me over time that actually when you are managing in this way, it's not just the person that you're managing as a PM. It's you need to have this tripartite sort of influencing relationship, and that's not always immediately obvious. It's sort of something that evolves because you suddenly realize that actually I need to speak to their line manager about this. But actually, if you can start at the start of your project and go, who do I need on my project, and therefore who are the other people I need to have a relationship with related to that person. So I tend to start sort of bottom up first with an initial discussion with the person I would like to be involved in my project. Who do I need to discuss your involvement with? It seems that you're the right fit for this, or you have the right skill set, you have the tool I need. How do we go about securing you for the project? And then it's typically a conversation with their line manager. This is the person I need. How do we make them available? What does that do to their workload? And how do we make sure that's balanced? And then you get into sort of quite a more negotiation orientated discussion, which is around, do we need to backfill this role? If I need this person available exclusively to the project for a period of time, do we need to backfill that person? Can we balance it with something else they do? Is there an opportunity for a junior member of a team to fill their role while they come off onto the project? And then you multiply out the sort of learning opportunities. So there's lots of conversations you can have that, but having that initial conversation with the line manager. And and you know, it is a sort of slightly unhelpful answer to say as soon as possible, but as soon as you're aware of the person you need on the project, the trap you can fall into is just to be having a conversation with that person rather than a complete chain of management. And recognize early on that the line manager is going to need to be not just engaged but actively supportive throughout the life of the project, and you end up needing to have this dual relationship. It's not just about the person you're managing, it's about making sure they're supported by their line management, making sure that the line management is being kept appraised of when you need, you know, perhaps there's a crunch point on the project where you particularly need you know, this week I need them 5 days a week, but you know, after November it's going to drop to 1 day a week. Keeping the line manager baked into that conversation so they know the peaks and the troughs of your project.
Okay. And Chris, in terms of those resourcing expectations, is that just a conversation piece, or is that something that's sensible to have outlined in an email or a document that you can refer back to?
Yeah, so I mean, the soft skills around influencing are probably the most important 80% of what you do. But you know, when things go wrong, or to avoid things going wrong, that 20% where you have the transactional agreement, and different organisations do this in different ways. You know, at Linklaters we have a formal form, a resource request form that we use that formalises that agreement between yourself as a project manager and a line manager around how many days a week or what commitment you have from individual resources. It doesn't have to be that complex. It can be as simple as an email summarising a conversation, and that way, if there is in the future some kind of conflict around allocation of time to a project, you're having a discussion about a previous agreement that's been documented rather than arguing over he said, she said around a conversation that may have been misremembered.
Okay, perfect. So I'm just going back to the poll because everyone's chipped in very quickly on that. The middle layer of influence appears to be the most challenging by quite a long way. 60% of people that have answered have said the middle layer is the most challenging, which is the line manager layer, which is a really interesting one. So that ties in quite nicely with that documentation beforehand to really set the scene on those resourcing expectations.
I think it's important to say on that point, you're absolutely right. Getting and Chris is completely right about that. You know, it is 80% on the soft side, but you must have that, and different organisations have different levels of detail. You can have the whole thing fully scoped. This is all the things we need this person to do, or it can just be an email, you know, that says, "Can I have so and so 3 days a week for the next 6 months?" But there must be something there, because as Chris says, if you don't have something in place, that's where that relationship can very quickly start to fall apart. It takes all the heat out of any sort of a later negotiation, because you're pointing back to a sort of objective document.
And what about people that are maybe currently managing projects that are in flight and haven't got that in place? Is it too late to put something in place now?
No, it's not too late. I mean, you could, if you haven't done this already, do it tomorrow or do it today after this webinar. It's really vital, and you know, all of these things will save you enormous amounts of time later on. It feels like a big time investment up front. We've all been in there where you're dealing with issues and it can take days to unpick, when actually small investment of time up front and then nurturing those relationships every week, every month will avoid hours, if not days, of time lost later on.
And I say it can be as simple as an email. Just email all the engaged line managers to say, I'm just sort of formalising my resource commitments for the project. So just to remind you, you know, Jane's going to be working on my project for 3 days a week for the foreseeable. Do you agree? Mm-hmm. It can be as simple as that.
So you've got that outlined beforehand. You've got your resources sorted. What ways can project managers motivate their project teams? We talked earlier, they're not directly responsible for salary, and they're not there to set development objectives. What can they do?
Do you want to go first, Chris?
Yeah, I'll jump in. The answer is there are a lot of things you can do. I mean, you know, if in a quite sophisticated organisation, you know, everyone should have development objectives that they agree with their line manager, and personal objectives and skills development objectives, and hopefully your project will play into that. So just taking an example, you know, everyone's thinking about cloud projects now, moving into the cloud. People in delivery roles are often concerned about how they're going to develop those new skills. Well, as a project manager, you've got an opportunity there to help them with that. So the project should be able to deliver some training, deliver some tangible improvements in their skill set that they can point to at the year end. if someone's got some objectives, talk to them about it. Maybe they want to learn something by the end of the year, or maybe they want to develop their management skills, and they can be put in charge of a work stream. There's lots of levers you can pull as a project manager. It's quite hard to get to all of them on this, but if you're talking to someone, you can quickly draw those dots together and say, okay, this fits for that person, and actually this will work for the project too. Tends to work out pretty well. It doesn't always work, but you can normally find something that someone can hang their hat on and say, yes, that's what I'm getting out of this project.
And I guess that's making it a bit more reciprocal in that they're getting something out of it just as you are to deliver that. Okay.
And if you can formalize that into, and again, through a discussion with their line manager, can we incorporate this into their annual PDP in some way? Is there some way we can get some formal recognition for their involvement in the project? That's great. But right the way down the line to the sort of much softer, just, it's amazing how much you can bring someone along and incentivize them just by taking the time to sit down with them for a coffee for half an hour and go, what do you want to get out of this? How do we help you to get the learning you want to get? And then set the project up to help them get the thing that they want to get out of it, and it not just be a one-way relationship. You need to do this for me. It becomes much more of a, I need this done. How do we make that interesting to you? And that's, the conversations you have around that can really help, and it will often turn up sort of interesting and sort of counterintuitive things around why they might want to be involved.
Okay. And how can you, so that's sort of more on an individual level. So you're working with someone that's on your project team to get them on board. How would you get a project team working together? Because that also sort of involves a lot of influencing.
Well, shall I go?
Yeah, you go first, Jeremy.
For me, that's sort of one of the core skills of the PM is to assemble a perhaps disparate group of people and get them aligned around the same thing. And it comes down to being very clear about why we're doing the project. So I always go back to, and Nicola, you've heard me umpteen times, and actually Chris as well, go on about vision, benefits, objectives. If you have a project vision, the overarching reason for doing this, that's very helpful. But giving everyone in the room the visibility of what are the benefits, why are we doing this project? It helps them, for one, it gives them a common sense of purpose. It stops what can quite often happen if that isn't established, which is different people on the project thinking we're doing it for different reasons. And therefore, not intentionally, but actually unintentionally sort of acting in different ways around the same problem rather than in a coordinated way, because you all understand what it is you're trying to do. For me, that's why the project kickoff meeting is hugely important, because it's a great opportunity to get everyone around the table at the start of the meeting and get it up on the wall there. This is the reason we're doing this. Is everyone clear on that before we put a spade in the ground or do anything else? This is why we're doing this, because then that also empowers people to make decisions along the way without recourse to the project manager each time for guidance or the sponsor. If you're clear why you're doing it, that makes decision making on your everyday work much easier, because you know where you're headed. Therefore, you make a decision that brings you towards that rather than away from it.
I think I agree with that, Jeremy. And I'd add as well, there's a point in here around, it's one of the hardest skills in project management, in team building and being comfortable with some level of conflict within your team at the start when people are getting used to each other, but also being very cognizant and very quick to and we've all been there in projects, to cut off the people that necessarily want to run forward and lead when that's not necessarily their job, or people that are being left behind and not having their voices heard. And it's one of the hardest skills we have as a project manager, is making sure that everyone has that kind of inclusive feeling about the project, whilst also allowing that natural pecking order and people working out their place that has to happen too. It's a really hard line to tread.
Okay. So you've established so far we've gone to the line manager, we've got the resourcing that we need, and we've outlined that in writing. We've gone to the gone to the project team and looked at what they could get out of this, and we've got the project team working towards the same objectives. What do you do if that doesn't work? I'm sure there's people online at the moment that are sitting there thinking, well, hold on a second, that sounds great, but I've got a project and my team aren't working together. What tips can you give, starting with you, Jeremy, to try and fix that situation?
I think if you as as a project manager, have the sense that that something is going wrong, I think my primary tip would be to meet that head on. Don't be afraid to have the conversation. I tend to, if the issue is known within the project team, if it depends on the nature of the issue. If the nature is, I sense that this individual is unhappy and they're not doing their bit of the thing, then it's a conversation with the individual to say, what is it that, but make sure you are addressing it with them. Why are you unhappy? I get this sense that, things aren't quite working, or we had an agreement, you've missed your milestone 3 weeks in a row. How do I support you to get there? And take any sort of sense of blame or anything like that out of the conversation. It's this is where I need us to be. You're intrinsic in getting us there. How do we help you to get there? Is there a reason we haven't got there yet? And it can, we can very quickly infer there could be multiple reasons. They could be completely overworked. There could be issues at home. It could be any number of things, but you've got to have the conversation or you're not going to know, and you're not going to be able to work with them to get to that solution. If it's something more fundamental with the project, so rather than an individual, but there's an issue with the project, then it's get everyone in the team around the table. Everyone in the project needs to have this sense that we are all responsible for the project's success, and we all win when the project delivers. And then it's a case of, and again, there might be a sense in the room that it's one person's fault, but it's the team's to fix it. So this is the issue, lay it out as the PM. And how do we as a group fix this? And if it's so-and-so needs some support, how do we support them? But for project issues, make it the project team's role. And that should be exciting for them as well. We've got a problem. People like problem solving, typically. People want to be involved in projects because a project is a problem to be solved. How do we do this thing? So involve them in it. Don't be too dictatorial as a PM if there are issues going on. There are times where you will need to sort of make the decision, but you want to involve everybody in the solution to the problem.
Okay, Chris, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think again we go back to that 80%, 20% piece, which is it's still 80% of the day-to-day soft skills that you deploy as a PM, but having in place your project plans with dates on it that you're tracking, early warning indicators around how you're performing against your overall project goals, key performance indicators on projects, all that sort of thing. Those are the things that, along with your, developed project management spidey sense of when things aren't quite right, those are the tools that you need to identify when things aren't right and when you have to intervene. And I will say, you shouldn't be afraid to sometimes just throw it all up into the air and say, this isn't working. Is there a different way we need to work together? And have an open conversation with the team. Because maybe they prefer to work in a more agile way, or they might not like the cadence or the tone of your meetings. And I've had that before as well, especially when working across different geographies. People like to work in different ways, and sometimes they don't want to tell you because they think that they'll upset you, or they want to defer to you as a project manager. Actually be really open to different ways of working.
Okay, that's a really interesting point. We talked last week about finding people in the team that might be able to dish the dirt a little bit if there are issues that we're not aware of. Anything to add on that?
I'll let Chris talk to this one. It's a really interesting point, though. Is how you utilize different people in different ways at times.
Yeah, I mean, we've all had people on our project teams with lots of different personality traits and character types, and you want a good set of optimists and people that are driving the project forward and helping you solve problems, but you also want your group of pessimists or deep thinkers who are critical to helping you understand risks or point out to you when things aren't quite going well. And I've had, a number of times been saved from disaster by the quiet people in the project team who, spent enough time getting to know them and developing that trust where they feel comfortable enough to turn to you and say, actually, this isn't going well and this is going to go wrong, or we have a significant risk here. They might articulate it as a significant risk, they might articulate it in a different way, but as a PM, you understand that through the language of risk and say, right, okay, need to do something about that. And unless you spend that time getting to know people and developing that trust, you won't get the benefit of those pessimists who can spot things that are going to go wrong. They'll just sit there being quiet, and there'll be an "I told you so" voice, or "I didn't tell you so" in some cases when it all does go wrong.
I think that's a really interesting point. I love the concept of not being a pessimist but being a deep thinker. That sounds like a positive take on it. Excellent. In terms of of other areas that you can, what to do if things do go wrong. Obviously, talking to the team you've mentioned, talking to the individual, presumably going, if they're being pulled in different directions from line managers, that would refer back to that sort of written confirmation you've set out at the very start around what the resource requirements are for your project.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, to that point, you start with the individual. If it's a problem relating to the individual's performance, perhaps, then obviously the next, part of that conversation is a conversation with the line manager. If you identify that, for example, it's a workload issue, I've just got too much on, I'm not getting to it, then, to me, the obvious next step is to have a conversation with the line manager as well and bring them into that conversation. How do we make this manageable? They've got their day-to-day job, and we must be, respectful. And the projects do have a tendency to steamroller through everything else. And I think that can cause bad blood sometimes. You have to be respectful that people have got a day job to do, and they can find that, a bit too much with the project work as well. So making it a broader conversation, involving the line manager. Is there an alternative way we can do this? If they're snowed under with their day job, is there another way we can do this? Can we bring a third party in? Is there someone else on the team who has some capacity, who can either support them on the day job side or might even be able to step into the project and support there? So definitely you start to work your way out the three layers that Chris identified, and ultimately one hopes not to get there, but there is also the senior management conversation that says, perhaps there's another project that's pulling resources away or that keeps on taking precedence. And you need to be having that conversation around, well, this is now starting to affect my critical path or my ability to deliver, because all the people involved in it are also being pulled elsewhere.
There's a really key point as well here when you're developing your business case and PID documents, whatever documents you produce to get projects approved and initiated, around making sure that you're listening to the voices, normally sponsors and senior people who are saying let's do it cheaper and faster, and actually making sure, and this comes back to the point I made earlier on about understanding the priority of your projects across the different portfolio of projects, making sure you're building in enough wiggle room as well, so that if you do come across problems with conflicting tasks for your team, or the need to suddenly get backfill, that you've got that wiggle room in your project, both in terms of time and in terms of cost, and being able to hold that line with your sponsor at the start to make sure you've got enough in there. And the temptation is always there to minimize the complexity of these things. It happens every time, but that is your job as a PM, to make sure you're representing the team's views as well about the representation of the risk, both around resourcing and every other part of the project, to have that contingency when you need it.
Okay, it sounds to me like it's all about the project plans. A couple of people have come into the poll and it's a bit more focused on the top-down influencing. I think focus quite a lot on that middle layer line manager and also the bottom-up side of things. Any thoughts or advice on how you could tackle that, or how to approach that top-down influencing piece in a bit more detail?
Well, I think that the initial conversation where you understand the priority of your project in the portfolio at a static point in time when you start is one, but then making sure that you structure your governance group. So if you put together a project board or a steering group, making sure you have people that have that connection into those groups, and therefore they're making a bridge between the project team and your executive boards. That when you do go to speak to them, you've got advocates in there to say, well, this is why this is important, or this is why we need additional funding, or this is why we need additional resource. It's quite important. So being thoughtful about when you're structuring governance groups is key.
Okay, brilliant.
I think to add to that, oh, sorry, go on.
No, go for it.
Well, to add to that, sort of to build on the point that Chris made earlier around understanding where the project sits on that portfolio, but also when it changes. But I think there's something throughout the project which is reminding, the exec board or whoever it is, whenever you do your monthly show up to the board or whatever, having that visibility there, remind them this is the project. This is, I've got this key thing coming up. It's going to suck resources up for a period. Making sure that isn't just a conversation you have at the start, and this applies to sort of all these conversations, top, middle, and bottom. It's very easy to have the resource conversations all the time because you're seeing those people week to week to week. Or even day to day to day. The line manager, that middle layer, that might be a little less frequent, but you've got to still keep it regular. And the top layer is going to be less frequent still, but you've got to make sure you're not just having that conversation at the start, that you're reminding them throughout the life of the project that you're here, that we're doing things. Remind everyone why we're doing these things and what the impact of that means on the organization, on the organization's ability to resource things, what you might be clashing with, and so on.
Okay.
There's one more point I'd like to add in there as well, which is, every project gets to a point, especially if it's business facing, where the timeline becomes more and more set in stone and hard to change. And that's normally a time when you send communications out saying, we're going to set this product live on this date, or we're going to make a change at this date. That's what's really key, to get the senior top-down layer fully on board, because then any decision they make to reprioritize something else over the top of you is going to have a material impact, not only on your projects, but also on the reputation of your function, the reputation of the project itself. So it's very important they understand the consequence of any decisions they make at that point. We are sending comms out now. Nothing's going to stop us unless it's a showstopper. So please don't do anything that can interfere with that. Is a very important message that you or your sponsor need to give to senior execs.
And it filters all the way down. The people working on your team see that, and that acts as incentive and empowerment itself. We can, we have been given the space in which to deliver.
Okay. So one of the questions that we've got that's come through is, what happens if there's not actually a project team member or stakeholder nominated, but there's a very hierarchical situation of speak to my team from the business manager?
So this is, I'm going to sort of interpret that the line manager is sort of taking themselves out of it and saying, "Well, here's my team. Just go and talk to them."
Yeah.
I mean, that's disappointing, but I mean, but obviously it happens. And I think, I would not allow that to be the end of the conversation. I would try and re-engage, but perhaps the way to do that is to do it what is initially asked and go and speak to the team. Identify the person on the team who's going to be the best person for your project, but then take the conversation back to the line manager. This is the person you asked me to go speak to your team. I've done that. This is the person who I want involved with the project. And again, you get back to that sort of, if they're not going to engage with the softer side, then at least get them to engage with the transactional. This person's going to be on my project 3 days a week. Agreed. But you can build it out from there then. And what does this mean for their development objectives? What does this mean for their day-to-day workload? How does this impact your operation? I know you said go and speak to my team, but I can't do that in isolation. It will affect you. So being able to play that back in some way once you've done what they've initially asked it's just finding another way back into the conversation.
Yeah, certainly one's going to go on my internal risk register note there as well, which we all have as PMs, that particular line manager might be a tricky one, so may spend a bit more time with them than with others just to mitigate that risk.
They'll be the first as well with that attitude to deny all knowledge.
Yeah.
So actually
document everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Keep updating them. You may not want to have a conversation, but I'm going to phone you once a week and just tell you how it's going, because they'll be the first to go, I didn't hear anything about it.
Okay. If there's any other questions, please fire them through. There's a couple more to go through. In terms of your experience, and you've had years of experience in project management and program management, but is there any particular examples of when you've hit some tricky influencing challenges with project teams? I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here.
So I was looking at Chris and seeing he looked at me.
I'm trying to protect the guilty here by changing names. Well, I touched on one earlier on, which was a cultural point, and I was working on a project where the bulk of the project team were based in China, and things seemed to be going really well for me, and I thought that the project was going excellently. People were attending regular team meetings, progress was being made, and actually it was the project sponsor who eventually came to me and taught me a really good lesson here, which was the team came to him eventually and said, we're not getting good value out of our team meetings. We don't feel like this is working for us, but we don't want to tell Chris. So they kind of went to him to tell me, which is obviously not ideal. And across all of the different layers, what you're really trying to get here is to make sure people come and talk to you first if they've got a problem. And I hadn't spent enough time getting to know people over in China, the team over there. I'd been over to visit, but I hadn't kept that regular drumbeat of conversation with every single member of the team. It's a huge team. And ultimately, obviously, what was happening in the background was they were becoming frustrated with how things were going. And that then spilled out into a conversation with the sponsor, which is not what I wanted. It was fine, but it was not what I wanted at that time. So actually, I learned a big lesson there that even if people are in different geographies or maybe reticent to talk, it's still worth investing that time and making sure that you pick things up early. And if they do have a problem, they come to you rather than escalating, because that could have been quite bad had they've gone to someone who was maybe negative about the project or would have used it for another reason.
That's a really good example. Thanks for sharing that one.
Yeah, I think there's a related point, but I think there's something around, and one thing I still struggle with is when you have an interpersonal response to someone, like an incident. Like I struggle a little bit personally with the people who are just sitting in the corner and want to bemoan this project's a disaster, we should never be doing it in the first place, or it's all going to hell in a handcart. And I have a personal response to that, and sometimes my inclination is to go, I'm not listening to that, it's just negativity. But every so often out of that will come, actually, they've noticed something that other people haven't. There is an issue, and you've got to keep your ears open to that. So sometimes it's about sort of swallowing your personal response to them. We can't get on with everybody as much as we'd like to. And I think project managers, it's part of the role to try and be this sort of gregarious, find a way to, engage with everybody. But it's hard, and it's not actually possible with everyone. Some people just will not like you because there is a personality clash. You just don't mix, and they might know that, and you might know that. But if you know that, you need to get over yourself and get out of the way, because that and see them for what they are in the project team, as someone who's going to help you get this project delivered, irrespective of what your own personal feelings towards them are. But that's a really tough thing to do, and I'm staggeringly unsuccessful at it.
Just turning back to the poll again, I'm not at all surprised that the middle layer has come out at over 50% of a 3-horse race. And one thing that happens quite a lot that often gets overlooked is the people giving you resource are often also the line managers who are receiving a new service. Yeah. And that new service probably comes with additional responsibilities, some stress for them that they're going to have to take on even more work. And that's something that that you can have a conversation with them about. Actually, you need to build into your project plans how successful it's going to be, not just in delivering the project, but post-launch as well. And so maybe they're thinking about what their new target operating model is going to be and thinking how they're going to resource this. And that's often a conversation you can have where quite quickly you can resolve those issues around them giving you resource or being negative about the project, because you then go and include in your project plan and your costs additional headcount for them afterwards, or additional support for them afterwards, that then just clears away all that, and that you can turn them into someone who's massively on your side from being someone who's been quite a blocker.
That's a great shout.
That's a good tip. Another question that's come through is, do you have to be a technical expert to influence a technical project team? And any tips around that?
No. The answer. Absolutely not. I think
preferably not. In fact,
there are some industries and some projects where it is massively beneficial to be an expert. If you tend to find that the person who's project managing on a building site is really good at building and has done most of the jobs on that site. But in my world, in technology project management, if you are not completely daunted by your massive lack of knowledge or complete lack of knowledge about a project on day one, and that every single person in your project team knows something about this project that you don't, so you're the one with the least knowledge on day one, then you're doing it wrong. Because actually you should have built your team of experts, and your job in that initial part is to bring everyone together. Some PMs love learning everything about the product or a project as it goes on. Some don't, some manage it without having learned that much technical knowledge. But you're not expected to know everything from day one. And actually the skill is in bringing together those experts and leading from behind at first, really, although you want to set the right pace, is making sure that everyone's expertise is heard and you bring that together into the team.
Okay, good tip.
Completely agree with that. People who've been on training courses with me or read my book know I have a mantra: you are not the expert. It's so fundamental to and again, it comes back to incentivizing and influencing, actually, because by saying I am not the expert, I have gathered this group of experts together, because you're the folks that are good at this, and then you get out their way and let them do the thing that they are good at. If you're sat there sort of picking holes in what they do because you've got some level of technical knowledge about their role, that becomes there's elements of micromanaging in it, but it has an effect on the person's willingness to do it. If I'm just going to do this and you're going to sit here telling me I'm doing it wrong, why have me here? So actually you incentivize people and you motivate them by acknowledging that they are there because they have expertise that you don't.
Yeah.
And you are not the expert. Be an expert project manager. That's your role. Let the other experts that you've assembled be expert at what they do and get out their way.
But it's quite empowering as well, I'm guessing, to that technical team.
For the PM too, because it allows you to focus on the things that make you successful, which is delivering the plan to the within the budget and when you said you would, and to the expected level of quality. That's you do that every project. You're going to feel great as a PM, but you do it by getting out of the way of the people delivering the stuff.
Got another question that's come in, which is quite a timely one, I guess, at the moment. But we've obviously been working remotely for the last 18 months, and these conversations have been all carried out on email. Any thoughts or advice on how to get people talking more when people have been emailing so much over the last 18 months?
Yeah, I long for the day when the only emails I receive are either spam that's got through the spam filter or things that are confirming agreements already made where you really need to use an email to do so. And even in then, in some cases, we might get rid of that. Teams is really good for this sort of thing, and if you set it up correctly, then especially when you add new members to the team. I mean, not having to find and send them hundreds of emails that are the history of the project, and then just being able to be added to a team site and read that persistent chat and look at all the files that have been stored there. That's really valuable. It's going to be a journey, and I think we as project managers are going to be responsible for delivering that journey and that change to a world where people get away from email and embrace the new tools that are coming to us. But yeah, we're at the start of that journey, I think, still, and it's one we have to push, and hopefully we can all get involved in those projects and make them successful.
I think also what is true in normal life is true in a remote working situation, which is recognize that there is more than one way to engage with a person, and that I certainly I know a lot of people, and I've been in a lot of situations where the default has just been to set up a Teams meeting or a Zoom and have that, and the default in that has been to have the video on, and it's a slightly artificial situation and not necessarily the best for communicating that information. Let's have a phone call. Let me send you something, and then come back to me when you've got any questions, or sometimes it is the right thing, but there is more than one way to do it, and make sure also that you're thinking about who you're communicating with and what the best way to get that information to them might be.
Have you noticed, since being back in the office and having more face-to-face interaction, or those sort of catch someone making a coffee type moments, that you've been able to influence more successfully?
For me personally, absolutely. Yeah, the tools that we've used in the last 18 months have been fantastic in allowing us to continue what we're doing, and they've, I think, opened up people's eyes and minds to different ways of working. However, we're humans, and I think there's an element of that human interaction which is lost when you're not in person. That's not to say, well, that just means you can't do it on Teams or you can't do it on Zoom. You can still do it that way, but let's acknowledge that something is lost. A little something is lost when from a human face-to-face interaction.
I think looking at the senior level as well, how easy is it to get 15 minutes, half an hour in the diary with a senior exec? Very, very tricky using Microsoft Outlook or another calendar app. How easy is it to grab a snatched 5-minute conversation with someone when you're both in the office and they're just sat at their desk and you see them finish a call and you can see there's 5 minutes to the next one? Very easy. So, I mean, that top-down layer is where you get the most benefit out of being in the office, just almost stalking people so that you can get them when they're free.
Brilliant. And one last thing before we go, Jeremy, you mentioned something when we spoke last week, which I thought was really interesting to cover off, and that was to be sensitive to changes in behaviour within the project team. Could you just talk through that and
so yeah, it's sort of adjacent to this conversation almost, but it's about picking up on those early warnings when you've got people who you don't normally line manage, but you're having to get a sense of how the project team works as a whole. You will get that group of people working in a way that becomes familiar, and at that point, I think it's really important to be sensitive to any changes in behaviour. So is there someone in your room who's usually quite forthcoming, who for some reason has gone quiet in the last couple of weeks and isn't, is a bit out of kilter in meetings, or vice versa, someone who's normally very quiet but seems to be getting really irritated about this particular issue, which no one else is excited about, but they're getting quite, talkative about it. Those changes in behaviour are usually a signal that something else is at issue. And if you can sort of attune yourself to those changes in behaviour, and not just go, well, they're acting funny this week, but go, can I grab you? Is there a reason that you're so excited about this particular thing? Or I noticed you're a bit quiet. Is everything okay? One, it's a nice supportive thing to do anyway. Again, we are all humans. But typically it's a sign of something deeper and something that might ultimately, be an issue that you avoid because you've engaged and had the conversation. So looking out for those changes in behaviour, I think is a really useful way, one of influencing, showing the project team that you're listening to them, that you're sensitive to their changes in behaviour, sensitive to how they're performing, feeling, behaving, but also it benefits you as a PM in terms of that early warning of any issues you might have. You avert things that might otherwise have blown up in your face.
Brilliant, thank you. That really stuck in my mind from last week, so I appreciate that. I think that's everything we've covered. We've gone over time, which is always a good conversation. Jeremy, if anyone's interested in reaching out to you around training or your project,
thank you. And on that last point, people are getting back into offices now, so it's a really exciting time for us. We're revamping our training program. So if you are interested in upskilling your people, we deal particularly in training non-project managers, people for whom this isn't their daily bread, but people associated with this. So those teams, that project team who might want that shared common language, we're at everydaypm.co.uk. We offer training, coaching, mentoring, and of course there's the book you can buy there. So yeah, please do check us out.
Perfect. Chris, thank you so much for your expertise and for joining us today. I really appreciate that. And Jeremy, always, it's been a guide. And thank you everyone for joining. Hopefully speak to you soon.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye.